Let's try to learn about something interesting. So I want to open this right up front, okay? Asian people in America don't get their issues talked about that often. There are a couple of reasons for this. First and foremost, to my knowledge, there aren't as many there aren't as many Asian people in America as there are black and brown people. Also, we have more specific histories with black and brown people than Asian people in this country. With black people, of course, we had chattel slavery, which is about as bad as it gets. And with brown people, we have this ongoing immigration thing. We have our border with Mexico, and that tends to be where the discourse centers. Now, the Asian community in America it's taken on a lot of roles with time. Does everyone remember the Yellow Peril? Yeah. There was a genuine fear for a long time that Asian people were going to immigrate into America and Chinify the whole country. And of course, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act passed. Our immigration limited the number of Chinese people who could come in, and Chinese people came and built the railroads in part, and there were many of them on the West Coast. The East Coast has I think a more limited racial dynamic than the West Coast, because the East Coast is older. You have New York and Hampshire and Maine and what have you. The East Coast, racial relations for centuries were defined between black and white people. Because in the 1600s, I mean, of course, we kill all the native people. We did that. I'm not saying we didn't. But then in the actual communities we formed over there, in the North and the South, we had pretty much mostly black and white people. That was the primary dynamic. And then but by the time Americans really started to settle onto the West Coast, there were more Hispanic people in the country. We'd already had our little, Mexican-American war for the most part. And there were Chinese immigrants who were coming over to help build the railroads on the West Coast, which means that the racial dynamics on the West Coast flourished in a more, I want to say, it's not diverse. There was a little bit more complexity to the ways in which it originated. And there were some consequences to this. Whether those consequences be meted out in ways which are still visible today, like the fact that many West Coast cities have big, thriving Chinatowns, Japantowns, Koreatowns, at least more so than many similarly sized cities on the East Coast. We also have the myth of the model minority, which, how many of you have heard that term? Or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say heard of. How many understand that term? The model minority. Imagine a lot of you do. The gist of the model minority, of the concept, is that Asian people have been used as a weapon against black and brown people to promote the idea that despite being a minority, Asian people were still able to make it in America, but black and brown people didn't. Black and brown people, well, I mean, black people's history is rooted in slavery and apartheid and Jim Crow. And with brown people, you've immigrated. There's a lot of stuff going on there. But the Asian community, I don't think, was ever subjugated to the same types of pressures that those communities were. And the consequence of that is that Asian people's socioeconomic status in America was different. Now, internment camps, though, yes, there were the Japanese internment camps. Though, again, let's not play both sides on this. If you think the Japanese internment camps on their own come anything even close to chattel slavery for centuries, then come on. There are different types of pressures. And Asian people, I talked about this in my 1350 video. I talked about one of the reasons why black people occupy these really shitty inner city neighborhoods that have a lot of crime and drug problems. And a lot of this is really complicated. You should watch that video if you want more information on that. But the long and short of it is that due to a very complicated and very long-standing set of social forces, black and brown people ended up being pushed into parts of America highly associated with criminality, more so than Asian communities. And the consequence of that was that nowadays, Asian people don't have as high of a crime rate as black and brown people. which means that they get treated differently. Asian people, Asian people, we discriminated against them. We treated them poorly, second-class citizens. They came over here with nothing. But now, look at how low their crime rate is. Look at how economically productive they are. Look at that. Maybe you black and brown people should take some notes. Maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe they're doing something right. The nuance behind this is really, really complicated. But I think the model minority aesthetic can be best described by the Rodney King riots. Which, hold on, I get the year right. Yes, the Los Angeles riots. Just a bit before I was born. Gist of it was black people not treated great. Some video footage got out. What are you going to do? People got angry. A lot of black people got angry. Can't blame them. And here's what the government did, okay? Really, really interesting tactic, all right? So there were riots going on all over LA. Property damage, death, violence, looting. It's bad. And rather than sending the National Guard in to quell the riots, which probably would have limited damage to the greatest possible extent, instead what they did, they directed National Guard to protect wealthy neighborhoods, like Beverly Hills, and they basically corralled the riots towards Koreatown. Essentially, they blocked off areas of the city to push the riots towards the Koreans in the community. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first one is that Koreatown, it's called Kettling. Kettling, that's right. The first one is that means less white people would be hurt, which was a priority from the National Guard. The second one was that they knew, due to the relationship historically between the black and Asian communities in Los Angeles, that the antagonism between them would end up further vilifying the black rioters. That interracial conflict that didn't involve white people, that would make them look really, really bad. It would essentially turn into some big inner city race war that white people could tut-tut and wag their finger at from a distance. And that's exactly what happened. Because, you ever heard the term Korean rooftops? You can find some pictures. Hold on. To this day, the legacy of the Korean rooftop snipers is used as a bludgeon against black people in the United States. Rather than risk their property, snipers? Yeah, they're sniping. Rather than risk their property to the rioters, they took their weapons and they went up to the roofs and they were willing to shoot to kill to protect their property. Rooftop Koreans. And what a lot of people take from this is the model minority myth, that the black people were angry and irrational and violent, and the Asians were principled, willing to engage in self-defense, etc., etc. That the Koreans were willing to engage in their legal right to defend their property, and black people were just like a tidal wave to crash against their armed resistance. What this narrative leaves out is the fact that it was the deliberate policy of the state to make that happen. The National Guard could have stopped the riots. The National Guard could have blocked them off, could have contained them. They deliberately manufactured this incident because it suited the narrative they wanted to push. One which promoted the idea that black people are these violent mobs who need to be civilized. That's what they wanted to do. That's what they wanted to do. That was the goal. That's the model minority myth right there. So all of that is just... God, there's so much to talk about. In summary, for a wide range of reasons, black and brown people have had a different relationship to America than Asian people in this country, and often that has led to worse socioeconomic outcomes for Black and brown people. It also helps that a lot of Asian people immigrate in from other countries, like upper middle class families, and they come in and they bring a lot of wealth to the community. And the consequence of this, among other things, is the idea held in popular culture that as long as a group of people are sufficiently dedicated, sufficiently hardworking, sufficiently fastidious, like Asian people, that they can overcome systemic racism. The fact that Black and brown people haven't is a testimony to the fact that they do not have that fastidiousness, that, that willingness to engage in hard work. That's the myth. So with all of that being said, all of this precursor, I want it to be known. How do we know the police intend to create a race war? There are interesting documentaries on it. I can find documentation for a future stream, but this is like a very well corroborated piece of information. Yeah, the idea that the National Guard worked with the city to push that. Yeah, it's not exactly out of the realm of possibility. I'm pretty sure it was around that time that a Beverly Hills police chief had to be fired because over the radio he said, it was one night, it was before I was born, he said one night, first one to catch me an N-word gets a six-pack on me, or something like that. They just said that openly on the CV radio. I mean, like, just anyone can hear that. If you have a police scanner, you can hear. It wasn't not like a secret Discord DM that got leaked. They just said it. Police, racism. Come on, they go together. So anyway, with all of that being said, there's a story that's been going on lately. Wait, hold on. Your take would hold more weight if African immigrants didn't do well in America too. African immigrants do tend to do well in America because immigrants from Africa who can afford to move to America tend to be pretty wealthy. What does that have to do with what we're talking about, though? Doesn't that kind of support my argument, though? The real reason why Asian people, I'm going to be real right now. The real reason why Asian people have done better in America from their upbringing is largely because America has taken less effort to fuck them. That's the main reason, okay? Now, there are many poor Asian people, and there are Asian ghettos and Asian inner city areas, and let me tell you, Koreatown in Los Angeles, not the safest place. Trust me, I lived in the area, okay? A lot of wonderful stuff there, also not always the safest place. But America has not taken the same strides to fuck Asian people the way that they have Black and brown people. Not in a lot of ways. And that is a complicated subject, but I would like to move on to the actual thing that I'm trying to talk about here, if at all possible. Which is this. Apparently, we have ourselves some hate crime discourse. Now, there's been a lot of historical antagonism between Asian people and Black people in America, part of which is a product of that minority model, or that model minority narrative. I imagine a lot of Black people resent the fact that their systemic oppression is dismissed on account of the comparative success of Asian people. And I imagine a lot of Asian people have adopted internally the idea that their relative success is a product of them possessing something that Black people do not. There are plenty of Asian people who are racist against Black people. I can tell you that. And there are plenty of Black people racist against Asian people. So there's a now this isn't everywhere always between all people, but I'm saying these are trends that exist. These are things that happen. Let's go.
There have been a string of violent attacks on Asian Americans across the country in recent weeks that had gone widely unreported.
Last Thursday, an 84-year-old Thai American was murdered in San Francisco. He died this week. On Wednesday, a 64-year-old Vietnamese grandmother was assaulted in San Jose, and on the same day, a Filipino-American was slashed across the face on a subway in Manhattan.
2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee, civil rights activist, and Rise CEO Amanda Nguyen went viral, drawing attention to some of the attacks.
Stop killing us. We are literally fearing for our lives as we walk out of our door, and your silence rings through our heads. It roars.
Asian Americans have been the targets of xenophobic attacks and harassment throughout the coronavirus pandemic, with more than 2,800 anti-Asian incidents recorded by the Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center between March 19th and December 31st, and still more cases that went unreported.
In 2020, the fact that the president used words such as China virus, Wuhan flu, and even more pejorative terms really fueled this notion of xenophobia, this otherness that we saw in our community. And people demonized the Asian American community for COVID-19.
John C. Yang, President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, says the recent attacks have caused the community to, quote, hunker down again.
I was tired of living in fear, and I wanted to scream,
In his first week in office, President Biden issued a memorandum condemning this discrimination.
Today, I'm directing federal agencies to combat resurgence of xenophobia, particularly against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders that we've seen skyrocket during this pandemic. This is unacceptable, and it's un-American.
But it's not new. Discrimination against Asian Americans began long before COVID-19.
We are consistently asked, well, where are you from? No, really, where are you from? Even if we've generations been here, even if we built the railroads in the 1800s, even if we fought in wars, we were still rounded up like animals in internment camps and lynched in one of the biggest lynchings in US history. And our history is not taught. That's what I'm advocating for, our stories to be covered and our history to be taught, because these things create empathy. It will help people understand that Asian Americans are Americans.
And Asian Americans aren't alone.
But I think it's also important to recognize that a lot of these issues are faced by more than just the Asian American community. It's faced by other communities of color. What we need to be worried about is economic security for everyone. We need to be worried about making sure that people are safe. And that starts from the community. It starts from having conversations, oftentimes within the community, between different races, between different groups of people, to understand where these differences come from so that we could come to.
Okay, now we're at the PRP's point. Now, what this little video segment doesn't cover is the fact that there seems to be a black on Asian character to these to some of these attacks. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I actually have not been able to find any reliable research or data on the propensity with which it is specifically black people who are engaging in hate crimes against Asian people. I can think of a couple of potential explanations for there being a disproportionate prominence of black people attacking Asian people. I can think of a couple of examples. So here are some right off the top of my head. Now, first of all, the idea that it is only black people that are doing this is absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case, even slightly. People of all communities and races have been engaging in violence and targeting against Asian people since COVID-19. That's a thing that has been happening broadly. They've been experiencing a lot of systemic oppression on account of that. Great, cool, great. Not great. Not cool and not great, to be clear. So, if there is a narrative developing that a lot of this violence or targeting is coming from the black community, or at the very least a disproportionate amount, there are two easy explanations for that. Now, again, I haven't seen any data that corroborates either, but it's a possible explanation to both. The first one is that in some communities, especially in West Coast communities, there's a pretty strong overlap between the type of neighborhoods that Asian people live in and the type of neighborhoods that black people live in. For example, in Los Angeles, Koreatown is pretty close to downtown, and downtown's periphery is full of, poor inner city black people. So they're in close proximity to each other. I know that similar things happen in Portland. I know that similar things happen in San Francisco. I know that similar things happen in Seattle. Wait, why is Vosh talking about this if he doesn't have any evidence that what any of is saying is the case? Because narratives matter. You think that something doesn't matter because people are only talking about it? The second explanation that I can think of is that it's a product of historical animosity. Like we talked about, like what we talked about. I don't know how much of this is being manufactured. And in fact, I strongly suspect that a large portion of the blacks attacking Asians narrative is being constructed by conservatives to avoid taking responsibility for the fact that Trump's rhetoric is what's generated so much of the attacks against Asian people. Because I've heard this discourse play over and over and over again. Hey, hate crimes against Asian people have skyrocketed since COVID-19. And the conservative will say, yeah, well, it's black people attacking Asian people. And black people didn't vote for Trump. First of all, even if you didn't vote for Trump, you're still susceptible to rhetoric that comes from the president. Even if you didn't vote for him. That doesn't mean you're not going to be affected. You can disagree with Trump, but still think like, I don't know, Wuhan flu, China virus, etc., Kung flu, blah, 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 blah. You can still promote that narrative. And second of all, the fact that this is being used as a convenient scapegoat by conservatives makes me suspicious. Here, somebody link this. Black on Asian crime statistics. Wait, where is this from? Finance Geek? Wait, what? Wait, what is this citing? It's just screenshotting charts from other... Where is this from? What are we citing? Other reading? Yeah, I don't... This isn't reliable. This is sus, okay? This report vented, all right? As a general rule, like, no citation. I don't know. Does it have a citation here? Read the call to action, Lamau. Where? What call to action? Call to action. Oh. Spread awareness of the racism. Oh, wait, here we go. Ha! Vote for people who are willing to protect law and order instead of catering to preferred minorities. Typically, Republicans are more fair, while Democrats are racist and tend to favor certain groups like African Americans and ignore crime from them. Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. Okay. We saw them. They vented. We saw the kill. It happened in electrical. We reported it. There were 3 other witnesses. Sus. Okay? You like that? You like the Amogus reference? So we don't have any real data then, okay? Who saw that call to action? Did you just see that while I was scrolling up and down? That was good. I was looking down below it to see if the links went anywhere. Very nice. Let me see this. Some members of the Asian and Black communities are feeling under siege after a series of high-profile robberies and assaults in Oakland and other parts of the Bay Area, and they're trying to bridge the hurt and work together in the aftermath. While some Asian Americans are feeling jeopardized by the brutal assaults and thefts, there are Black community members who feel like they're being racially profiled in the hunt to capture those responsible. Both communities have been victimized, whole lot of trauma on both sides. Wow, playing both sides, huh? If there's no data, we're just mucking about in the narrative. That is precisely what we are doing. But exploring the explanations, the reasoning behind a narrative is not the same thing as propagating misinformation. There's a whole lot of vague gesturing at this issue, and I think that nothing alleviates the uncertainty of that issue better than like just addressing it, you know? Just digging into it. The tension between the Asian and Black communities is building right now, and we cannot repeat history, tweeted Michelle Kim of Oakland. Asians, we cannot fight anti-Asian racism without being anti-Black. Oh, we can fight, without being anti-Black or pro-police. Black folks, people condemn anti-Asian rhetoric within your own community and amplify our pain. It doesn't help when some wealthy people have offered huge rewards for the arrest of certain suspects because it ends up putting bounties on Black men's heads. Some volunteers have started patrolling Chinatown streets themselves. Jesus. The overall number of reported crimes in January is down 60% from last January, and robberies are down 40%. So the actual crime is down massively in Oakland, apparently. These are more high-profile incidents. How much of it is just them being more prominent, and how much of it is them actually increasing in their in their frequency? Jeez. There was a black kid on TikTok with the same name as somebody who attacked an Asian man. There were hundreds of comments in his videos calling him slurs and talking shit about BLM. And then when it came out it wasn't him, there were like 0 to no apologies. Why would you assume that like a TikToker is the person you're looking for? Jesus. Like, besides everything else being said there, you know? Just very stupid. All data we have is from 2019. Yeah, well, that's not relevant to what we're talking about. We're talking about right now hate crimes from 2020. Oh yeah, I guess it's not that much of a stretch to assume that a TikToker would have some antisocial characteristics. Man. You know what? I'm actually going to call a hard sell here. Data might come out later to contradict me, but I'm feeling pretty confident in the thing that I believe right now. I think that this whole black on Asian narrative is being widely overstated as a product of conservative propaganda mixed with a couple of aberrant and anomalous and highly publicized attacks on Asian people from black people. I don't know if there's any statistical significance to it. There might be some statistical significance, but the idea that this is some sort of like interracial banter, I think is ridiculous. I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's some massive trend here outside of the existing trend we already knew about, which was the trend that Asian people are being discriminated against and subjugated to a lot of misinformation, largely on account of COVID-19 backlash and the Trump administration's behavior. Hold on. A TikToker murdered her disabled sister yesterday, so shrug. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, the crimes of TikTokers will be well explored in the future. Okay, we'll get to that. I don't know how I feel about this take. Well, here's the question, okay? And I'm actually asking you guys this question, all right? What do you want to do about it? The more you propagate this idea that it's some kind of inter-community dispute, the more likely Asian people are to adopt pro-policing tendencies, to be reactionary and fearful, and the more crime it's going to incite against black people. And also, it doesn't really seem to... I doubt this is like a narrative that's going to positively affect discrimination against Asian people either. I sincerely doubt that scapegoating black people, again, is really going to improve the treatment of Asian people in America, you know? So I don't know if this narrative is supported, and I don't know if this narrative produces any positive discourse. An incel in YouTube chat would like to debate you? Vosh, study shows rise of hate crimes, violence against Asian Americans during pandemic. No, hold on, wait. I'm not saying there isn't a rise in hate crimes. I'm saying that the idea that these hate crimes are being significantly and disproportionately pushed by black people does not seem to be... I don't know how substantial a narrative that is. This might kind of end up being the 30 years down the line version, again, of the Rodney King riots, where the people who are really responsible for what happened, in this case conservatives and their support of Trump, want to avoid responsibility for the consequences of their actions by scapegoating black people against Asian people, thus turning it into some bant between two separate otherized racial groups, rather than adopting a narrative that encompasses them. This might just be a modern version of that. If the COVID outbreak begun under a Trump administration and the China flu term was used by Biden, I don't know why the China flu term would be used by Biden, but Do you think we would have seen this hate behavior towards the Asian community? Well, I would consider calling it the China flu kind of corresponds to hateful behavior. So if Biden did that, then yeah, I think he'd be on the hook for that and the stuff that took place. Vosh, as an Asian person who grew up with the black community, it has been increasingly frustrating that my peers have been using the rising anti-Asian hate crimes as some kind of oppression Olympics to black people or to discriminate against them more. Any idea how I can talk to these people? I mean, a lot of the Asian people in America are just racists. It's like, it's not some like special, magical, different kind of racism. It's the same type of racism that black people experience from white people. It's the same tropes, the same stereotypes, the same misconceptions. And I think you would deal with them roughly the same way. That is to say, you push back against them as hard as you can and promote the idea that intersectionality is the only way we're getting out of this hole together. Vosh, there was a trending thread I saw on Twitter last night where a black woman was saying how black people have no reason to attack Asian people and were raised not to attack them. Members of the Asian and black community were saying how people, mostly conservatives, are trying to pit them to oppress each other. I think that is the most likely explanation for what we're currently seeing, because what we're seeing right now, let's be clear, is a narrative without data. The narrative exists, but the data doesn't. People in chat were saying, why talk about this when there's no data? Well, that's my point. A narrative without underlying data suggests to me an agenda. And the only people who benefit from this agenda are the people who have been pushing it. The conservatives, who want to scapegoat, who want to avoid taking responsibility for anti-Asian hate crimes as a product of what Trump has done. Asian people are playing right into conservatives' hands, though, and this is making us black people angry. Hold on, chill, okay? It's not Asian people playing right into conservatives' hands. It's everyone in America, or at least parts of everyone in America, including some Asian people, being susceptible to conservative propaganda. What you just said right there was you falling for the other side of that narrative. Asian people are playing into this, making us black people angry. You're essentializing the conflict from the other perspective. And then there are going to be black people who get angry over this, and then they're going to go ahead and they might actually be incentivized to do hate crimes. And then the discourse continues. The only solution here is uniting against the agents responsible for the narrative. White people. No, not white people. Conservatives. Of which there are plenty Asian, brown, and black ones. Does that make sense? Have we addressed this to a satisfactory degree? The reason why I'm frustrated by this topic is that I actually spent like an hour last night looking up stuff in it, and I wasn't actually able to find much. You have a couple of one-off incidents, yeah, and that's not to say they're not terrible. It's not to say they're not severe or shouldn't be looked at. They absolutely should, but what I was really looking for was this idea that there was like this big like systemic misrepresentation, this big like systemic problem of black on Asian hate crimes. And all I could find was evidence systemically of anti-Asian hate crimes. Do you think we'll ever get over racism? Yeah, as long as everybody likes and subscribes to my live streams, make sure to ring the bell. You know, donate if you can. Follow me on Patreon. You know, follow me on Twitter. Go to my Instagram. Find my Facebook and TikTok pages. Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say we can make it happen.